I'd like to begin the program today, the birth of Israel, Truman, and the birth of Israel, celebrating, commemorating the 75th anniversary of President Truman's decision to recognize Israel. And I'd like to have Cantor Hazan Tal Ben Yehuda join me on the stage. She will be singing the national anthems of Israel and the United States of America.
You know what to do. Please join me. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Kolod baleva penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulfate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo avda tikvateinu hatikva bat shnot alpayim liyotam chofshi be'aretzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim liyotam chofshi be'aretzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim. You may be seated.
Thank you. That was amazing. I'd now like to invite Rabbi Michael Zedek up to the stage. Rabbi's going to make a few comments. Thank you.
Inviting a rabbi to make a few comments. I was told to give an invocation. But in the immortal words of every rabbi from time immemorial, before I speak, I do want to say a few words. It's raining outside. In Jewish tradition, that's a good sign. That's a good omen. It's a good thing. Oh, I didn't want to invoke her name, but what's the the housekeeping expert? It's a good thing. Martha Stewart. Thank you very much. Now, let's get serious. It's a grave moment in the Exodus drama. Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, blocks the Israelite advance as the chariots of Yul Brynner are in hot pursuit. Moses tries to allay the newly liberated slaves' panic, and then the Torah informs us he turns to God, at which point the text says, God says, Ma titzak elai. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisa'u. Why do you cry out to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. For those whose Hebrew's a little rusty, I thought I should translate. And may the awesome legacy of President Harry S. Truman remind us, forward. May the historic rebirth of a national sovereignty marking now the 75th year of a reestablished 3,000 years young state of Israel challenge us both here and there. For there is always room to go forward. Forward to be better, forward to form an even more perfect union, forward to do better. And may this gathering urge us to join in that effort. And may the sacred dimension all around us, and the holiness, even the Holy One within us, inspire all that we may make a fractured world a little better, a little more, and a little more still. For then we shall do what prayer always insists, that we rise up to become better persons than we were moments ago. On that day, perhaps, God may suggest that we have done what we must, gone forward, and that we shall have done that work very well indeed. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May that be God's will. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. And Cantor Ben Yehuda, thank you for those lovely songs you sang, united us in song and spirit. My name's Alex Burden. Good morning. Thank you for being with us. I'm the executive director of the Truman Library Institute, and it's wonderful to see so many friends, so many friendly faces. I think I see some grumpy faces. They're like, here comes Alex's standard speech again, but it's not. We'll have some thank yous, and we'll have some recognition, but I really appreciate you all being here. There's a couple of special groups that I want to identify, acknowledge. The Truman Library Institute's Board of Directors, led by our board chair, Pat Ottensmeyer, who's down on the front row. Our former board members, I see one of you smiling up at me now. Donors, members, and volunteers. There are several really prominent local Jewish institutions with us today. I appreciate you coming to celebrate this special day with us. The Jewish Federation, the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, the Hyman Brand Hebrew Academy, and the Jewish Community Relations Bureau American Jewish Committee. Thank you for being with us. There are also several members of Jewish War Veterans Post 605, led by Adjutant Greg Quinn. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. I appreciate it. I also want to welcome and salute Susan Jacobson, who is with us today. Susan is the grandniece of Eddie Jacobson, the close friend of Truman's, who played such a pivotal role in convincing the president to recognize Israel about 75 years ago today. Thank you all for being with us on this historic occasion. And how appropriate for us to be here to do this at the Truman Presidential Library and Museum in this historic auditorium on a stage where so many noteworthy things have happened. Today, we are reflecting on the 75th anniversary of one of the most politically courageous decisions in the history of the American presidency. As you know, April 12th, 2020 marked the 75th anniversary of Harry Truman's rise to the presidency, and the Truman Library Institute and our partners, the Truman Library, are utilizing the 75th anniversary to not only honor and celebrate President Truman's legacy, and more importantly, to explore the complex global challenges he faced, as well as the lessons that can be gleaned from his principled leadership, his unwavering commitment to democratic ideals, and his world-defining decisions. Chief amongst those was President Truman's official recognition of Israel just 11 minutes after its creation on May 14th, 1948. And what a tremendous honor it is to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the birth of Israel and the recognition with each of you and with our special guest, Ambassador Michael Herzog, Israel's ambassador to the United States. The story of Truman and Israel and the life and times of Harry Truman, for that matter, need to be shared now more than ever. And this is the Truman Library Institute's mission, to share Truman's story and to teach important lessons from his life and presidency. I'm sure you all saw the dozens of kids that were in the building today getting in our way, but here with their excitement and enthusiasm, That's what it's all about, teaching a new generation about these important lessons. The new $30 million exhibition that hopefully you've all seen. If you haven't, it's right out there. Please go through it on your way out of the building. Does a wonderful job of sharing these stories and these lessons, including the chapter about the creation of Israel. The exhibition now includes the Shirley and Barnett C. Helzberg Jr. Recognition of Israel Gallery. This stunning gallery details how the dream of a Jewish homeland became a reality through a carefully curated selection of text panels, wall graphics, documents, artifacts, and photographs from the Truman Collection, as well as a dramatic film, The Recognition of a Jewish Homeland. Shirley, on behalf of all of us involved with the Truman Library, I want to thank you and your family for helping us properly share this important story through your generous support. Thanks, too, for the additional support we received for that gallery and for the new museum from all of you. Thank you. If you have not seen the museum, if you have not seen the Helzberg Gallery, please see it. Not today, come back, just let us know. We'd love to host you, we'd love to have you here. Museum attendance has been fantastic. But finally, I want to thank the friends who made this morning's gathering possible. Today's program and keynote address, as well as the elegant reception we enjoyed this morning, were made possible by the Truman and Israel 75th anniversary title sponsor, the Karen and Steve Pack family. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Yes, I'm going to try to make you cry. For your passion, for your generosity, your leadership, and your unflagging devotion to President Truman, his legacy, and his library. We are grateful. Additional thanks to 2 other Institute board members for their help with today's event, Marilyn Berenbaum and Harvey Kaplan. I appreciate what you've done very much. And now I'd like to introduce an individual who is committed to justice and understands the impact that prejudice has on democracy. Daniel Elbaum is head of North America at the Jewish Agency for Israel and the president and CEO of Jewish Agency International Development. Daniel has worked closely with members of Congress, foreign leaders and diplomats, and has appeared in media outlets ranging from NBC Dateline to Al Jazeera, and has published opinion pieces in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and other publications in the United States and Israel. Thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Daniel Elbaum.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Herzog, members of the Truman family, members of the Ben Yehuda family, and members of the Jacobson family, honored guests. It is a privilege to be here. It's for me, perhaps even a little bit of a special privilege. I came to the Jewish Agency a little over 2 years ago, and my first meeting as head of North America for the Jewish Agency was a week before I started at the Jewish Agency, and that was because of a call I received from the then chairman of the Jewish Agency, Isaac Herzog, who said, "I know you don't work for me yet, but I need you to join this call with the Truman Museum tomorrow." And then something about Karen Pack insisting that I join. I agreed, and so my start with the Jewish Agency has been inextricably linked with the Truman Museum. And for anyone in the room who doesn't know, and I suspect most of you do know, my boss, the chairman of the Jewish Agency at the time, is now the president of the State of Israel. And I'm sure you'll hear from the ambassador, sends his regards certainly about this event, but I know how important it was to him 2 years ago and remains important to him today. It is appropriate that this event happens in the month of May, not just because it is the month of Harry Truman's birth or the month of the State of Israel's birth, but it also happens to be Jewish American Heritage Month. And the story of Israel's creation is, of course, a story of Theodore Herzl's vision. It's a story of David Ben-Gurion's tenacity. The story of Harry S. Truman's political courage, but it is also, in many real ways, the story of American Jewry, personified by a person who's already been mentioned here today, and I imagine will be mentioned a few more times, one Eddie Jacobson, a proud son of Kansas City, who had the good fortune during his time in the Army to befriend a young lieutenant wearing glasses, unusual at the time, named Harry Truman, who went on to become a judge in Missouri, then elected to the U.S. Senate, then very short period of time vice president, and then president. And suddenly, Mr. Jacobson, who was not by any means known to be involved in politics or Zionism or anything else, found himself to be among the most important American Jews, not only in America at that time, perhaps one of the most important Jews in history, because he found himself with that opportunity, that closeness to power that the most eloquent speakers for Zionism simply didn't have. And he made one request. He made the request that his friend, the president, the most powerful man in the world, meet with Chaim Weizmann, who I'm told that Harry Truman first called Cham because of his inability to understand the language, the chet, which is a not uncommon American challenge. We shouldn't simplify history. Presidents don't make decisions because their friends ask them to, and all credit for that decision belongs correctly with the president. Presidents have to face a multitude of affairs, both political, moral, and what is in the best interest of their country and the world. But we should have no doubt that at that critical moment in time, when that meeting occurred, that a role had been played by Mr. Jacobson. When Harry Truman told the story years later, he said something that was not factually correct. He said that Eddie Jacobson was in the room in that meeting. The White House records show that Eddie Jacobson wasn't there. He was a recognized figure. The meeting was trying to be kept relatively secret from the press, so he was not invited to that meeting. But I think 75 years, in a very real sense, we can say that Harry Truman got it right, that Eddie Jacobson was in that room. And then in a very real sense, all of us as American Jews were in that room, hoping and praying for the fulfillment of a dream of 2,000 years to have the creation of a state of Israel, which Harry Truman then lended the power of the United States, the indispensable power in the world at that time and today, in friendship and in recognition, a power we continue to rely upon this day, as those of us who love the state of Israel know they can rely upon the United States at these times. I was not asked to give an invocation or a prayer, so Rabbi, I think, and Chazan, you'll forgive me and perhaps help me if I can conclude my remarks by saying the Shechianu, the prayer that we say when we reach a happy time. Those of you who know the words, please do join in. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shechianu v'higyanu zman hazeh. Thank you, O Lord our God, for helping us, keeping us, and sustaining us so we can enjoy this time. Thank you all very much.
Hello, Clifton. I'd like to invite Clifton Truman Daniel, President Truman's eldest grandson and the honorary chairman of the Truman Library Institute, to the stage.
That wasn't in my script, Alex. Thanks. Thank you all for being here today, and welcome. And thank you, Daniel. Thanks for being with us today. As Harry Truman's grandson, I often get asked to share my grandfather's perspective on his presidency, and people frequently ask, what would his opinion, his reaction be to events happening today? I have no idea. In this instance, though, I don't have to wonder what he would say if he could be here. He considered his decision to recognize Israel one of the proudest of his life. Trygve Lie, the first Secretary General of the United Nations, once made the assertion that if there had been no Harry Truman, there would be no Israel. Today, especially, I'd like to add that the same could and should be said of that other remarkable Kansas Citian, Eddie Jacobson, my grandfather's friend and business partner. They met in 1906 when Grandpa was 22 and Eddie was 15. Grandpa was a vault clerk at Union National Bank in Kansas City, and Eddie daily delivered a deposit of the day's receipts for Berger, Hanna, and Monger, a nearby dry goods store. Despite that significant gap in their ages at that age, they saw something in each other and became friends. They went their separate ways later that year, didn't meet again until 1917 at Oklahoma's Fort Sill. Both were training to fight in World War I. with Eddie's experience in retail and Grandpa's in banking, they had the only successful canteen on the base. Grandpa said that at one point they were earning 641%, just like Standard Oil. When the war was over, they sailed home together on the same troop ship, and reportedly both of them were seasick. So while they're hatching their business plan, you can imagine them going, "You want to open a men's clothing store?" "Sure." And they did. They opened Truman and Jacobson clothing store, and the post-war recession tanked the business. They did very well the first year, but it got them eventually. Eddie became a traveling salesman. Grandpa went into politics. Throughout his career, though, as a county judge, a senator, vice president, and president, Eddie rarely, if ever, traded on their friendship. Nor was he envious. When Grandpa joked one day to him, he said, "Why don't you enter politics?" Eddie said, "No, I'm going to make an honest living." When he did ask a favor, it was always for someone else, never himself. In 1948, with pressure mounting to recognize the nascent state of Israel, Grandpa was beset by both sides. The State Department, chiefly in the person of Secretary of State George Marshall, feared alienating the Arabs and their oil, and Marshall, whom Grandpa greatly admired, went so far as to tell Grandpa that if recognition was granted, he wouldn't vote for him in the 1948 election. On the other side were the American Zionists led by Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver, who was a great orator and a great leader, but also very aggressive and uncompromising. The story that he pounded on Grandpa's desk in the Oval Office is apocryphal, untrue, but apparently he did everything up to that. And as a result, the Zionists lost access. So in a panic, they turned to Eddie, imploring him to convince Grandpa to see Dr. Weitzman, who was at that point former head of the World Zionist Organization and the movement's spiritual leader. For the first few minutes of that meeting, Grandpa and Eddie chatted like friends. And then Eddie brought up Israel. And Grandpa became so annoyed that his former business partner actually said it was the closest he'd ever seen his old friend come to being an anti-Semite. Sitting behind his desk, Grandpa swiveled in his chair, turned his back on Eddie, and in desperation, Eddie scanned the room and found that small statue of Andrew Jackson that is on a pedestal near his desk in the Oval Office recreation. And he said, "Harry, you have a hero, Andrew Jackson. I, too, have a hero, Chaim Weitzman. He is the greatest Jew who ever lived. He is an old and sick man, and he just wants to talk to you, and you won't see him. That's not like you." And at that point, Grandpa started drumming his fingers on his desk, which Eddie knew from long experience was a sign that he was changing his mind. And Grandpa swiveled around in his chair, and he said what Eddie described. He wrote this out, what Eddie described as the most beautiful words he's ever heard. Grandpa said, "All right, you bald-headed son of a bitch. You win. I'll see Weitzman." At 11 minutes after midnight on May 14th, 1948, the United States became the first country to recognize the independent state of Israel. My grandfather always complained, he always bemoaned the fact that he thought he was too emotional. But there are only 3 instances that I know of where people have seen tears in his eyes. One was at the death of his old friend and press secretary, Charlie Ross. The other was at the death of his friend, Eddie Jacobson. And the third was when the ambassador's grandfather, Rabbi Herzog, told him that God had put him in his mother's womb to help bring about the founding of Israel. In 1952, in the waning months of Grandpa's presidency, Israel was still very much on his heart and mind. "I have tried hard," he said in a speech to the Jewish Welfare Board, "to right some of the injustices and to lift some of the suffering the Jewish people experienced so bitterly during the war. I did not do this as an act of kindness or charity, but in defense of the great principle upon which democracy is based, the principle that freedom resides in respect for the equal worth and dignity of each individual person." And now it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, an individual who works for those principles and ideals daily. Michael Herzog, Israel's ambassador to the United States, and I are connected by history by the branches of our family trees. And Ambassador Herzog, I'll take just a second off my script. You and I were trading a story earlier today when the ambassador's father, Chaim Herzog, was at Fort Leavenworth in the early 50s with a group of Israeli army officers learning how to use the Lance missile system that we were selling to Israel. They went by to see my grandfather with Eddie Jacobson's help. They went, he had a cold, apparently, a head cold, a slight cold, and my grandmother had said, no, don't do that. And then Eddie called back after she'd gone to church and said, get in the car, come get me, we're going over to the house. But Chaim Herzog, knowing that Grandpa was not feeling well, decided, I'm not going to take everybody in the house and overburden the president. So he took Moshe Dayan into the house, but he left Yitzhak Rabin in the car. Ambassador Herzog is the grandson of Israel's former chief rabbi, Yitzhak Halevi Herzog, the son of Israel's sixth president, Chaim Herzog, and older brother of Israel's current president, Isaac Herzog. His great-uncle, Abba Eben, perhaps the country's most famous diplomat, was Israel's foreign minister and ambassador to the United Nations and to the U.S. His summation of this moment 75 years ago was profoundly simple. Quite simply, he said, Harry Truman changed the world. He also noted that history teaches us that men and nations behave wisely once they have exhausted all other alternatives. Sometimes, however, people surprise us, and today we honor exemplars of courage who knew right from wrong and stood up for justice. These individuals, including members of my family and the Herzog family, are a source of inspiration and hope for our shared future. It is a privilege to have Ambassador Herzog's reflections and insights on the 75th anniversary of Israel's founding. He was appointed Israel's ambassador to the United States in 2021 by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, following a 40-year career in the Israeli military, where he served as head of strategic planning and later as a chief of staff and military secretary to 4 former defense ministers. For 25 years, Ambassador Herzog also actively participated in back-channel peace negotiations with Israel's neighbors, including the Palestinians, and from 2009 to 2014 was an official peace envoy. More recently, he has spent the past decade at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the Jewish People Policy Institute, researching and writing extensively about the issues he is now tackling in Washington. I imagine Ambassador Herzog might echo my grandfather's words. I wish for peace, I work for peace, I pray for peace continually. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome to the podium Ambassador Michael Herzog.
Thank you very much. Dear friends, distinguished guests, it is a pleasure for me and my wife Shireen to be here with all of you today for what is truly a great special gathering. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to Mr. Clifton, Truman, Daniel. Thank you for your wonderful words. Mr. Alex Burden, and the team members of Truman Presidential Library and the board for organizing this event to mark a milestone moment in the history between our two countries. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. On a personal note, as was noted here, my grandfather, who was the first chief rabbi of the State of Israel, and my father, Chaim Herzog, was Israel's first defense attaché in the US and later became Israel's sixth president. Both had the honor of meeting President Truman, and both were highly impressed and inspired by him, and there are stories running down in our family for generations about these meetings. We are commemorating here today the initial spark of what has become 75 years of a deep, unique bond between our two countries. This is a bond anchored in shared values and interests, as well as in special affinity between our peoples. I feel honored to have been invited to speak and reflect on these 75 years of friendship. The miracle of the story of Israel, which continues to evolve and develop, is linked to a few distinct historical moments. 75 years ago, only 11 short minutes after its birth, President Truman became the first world leader to formally recognize Israel as a nation-state of the Jewish people. The historical record shows, as was mentioned, that this was not an easy decision for President Truman. He faced opposition from senior officials in the Department of State, from among his advisors, as well as allies from across the globe. Some of them outlined to him why it was not beneficial to U.S. interests to recognize the State of Israel. Yet Truman was resolute, seized the moment, and took the first step in a joint journey characterized by a very close, ironclad alliance and partnership between our countries. President Truman did so first and foremost out of a deep conviction, believing that the Jewish people deserved the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. He did not do only what he perceived as beneficial, but more importantly, what he perceived to be fundamentally right. Truman was an avid reader of history. Once, when he reflected to a Jewish audience on his decision to recognize Israel, he told them that he was informed, among other things, by his deep impression as a child reading the Bible with his father of King Cyrus's decision in year 538 BC to allow the Jewish people to return to their homeland from exile in Babylon and to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. Truman was also well aware of the horrors of the Holocaust just a few years earlier. It was not lost on him that the Jewish people, having just emerged from a systematic effort to exterminate them, were ever more longing and willing to fight for their independence. Ultimately, President Truman has been proven right rather than his opposing advisors because of his strong sense of history and morality, and also because his life's experience as a worker, farmer, dealer, and above all, a brave military leader in World War I, all made him connected to real life. History is constituted by certain defining moments. As president, Truman created several such moments, and we are proud to be included in them. It is no exaggeration to say that his decision to recognize Israel was a critical point in the history of the Jewish people. People perhaps do not realize how easily it could have gone the other way. Yet, in that decisive moment, he courageously signaled to the world that the United States was committed to the idea of Jewish statehood. To this day, President Truman is well recognized in Israel and very much admired. Now let's look at what that statehood has achieved over the past 75 years. Israel has written an unparalleled success story. Against all odds, we built a thriving democratic society, all while being forced to fight wars and confront campaigns of terror and boycotts. We absorbed immigrants from over 70 countries around the world with over 70 languages. We created an amazing melting pot of cultures and traditions. We built formidable state institutions, became a startup nation, and turned into a powerhouse of creativity and innovation. All the while, we fostered our close partnership with the United States. I strongly believe that the values and ideas that underscored President Truman's decision and values and ideas that underpin the unique partnership between our two countries and at their core liberty, freedom, and equality remain as strong today as they were 75 years ago, notwithstanding significant challenges. The United States and Israel stand today as beacons of equality and democracy in a turbulent world. In practical terms, this partnership extends much further than ideas and values. Our alliance has yielded innumerable achievements. Together, we stand at the front lines of fighting violent extremism and countering the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the threat of terrorism. Our cooperation in the fields of defense, intelligence, and cyber is unparalleled. Our collaboration in the fields of science, technology, healthcare, agriculture, and many more areas of critical to humankind is breathtaking. American and Israeli collaboration in the tech sector is already making strides on many fronts, including in securing the vital supply chain, fighting climate change, tackling food insecurity, and preventing the next pandemic. These advancements make difference in the everyday lives of millions of Americans and Israelis, showing the power of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world in action. Unfortunately, not everything is rosy. 75 years on, there are still significant regional and international actors who refuse to accept Israel's existence and openly call for our destruction. First among them is Iran. Here we have a regime that espouses an extreme anti-Western, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic ideology, nuclear and regional hegemonic ambitions, and a constant drive to realize these ambitions, all while brutally repressing its people. They seek to do so through the development of nuclear capabilities and the build-up of heavily armed proxies across the Middle East, and especially in countries enveloping Israel. As we speak, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, an internationally designated terror organization and proxy of Iran, has been indiscriminately firing hundreds of rockets from the Gaza Strip aiming at Israeli civilians. In the face of the threat from Iran and its proxies, we have no choice but to be strong and resolute, to defend ourselves by ourselves, to enhance our deterrence, and to continue to work closely with the United States of America. We have said time and again, and we mean it, that we are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapon capabilities. Such a reality would gravely endanger our country, the stability of the Middle East, and the world. Furthermore, less than a century after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism is once again raising its ugly head in new and dangerous ways here in the United States and around the world. The hateful rhetoric spewed by public figures, the targeting of students on college campuses, and the outright attacks on Jewish persons and institutions across the country are expressions of a centuries-old hatred that has long sought to tear us down. The newest form of this ancient hatred has taken aim not only at the Jewish individual and the Jewish collective, but also at the Jewish state, implying that it has no right to exist. I am here to say that the idea of Israel as a national home of the Jewish people, which was recognized by President Truman 75 years ago, is just as legitimate and valid today as it was then. It is one thing to criticize certain Israeli policies. It is something totally different to question the very legitimacy of the Jewish state. Alongside the challenges, there are also opportunities. A major opportunity lies in the historic Abraham Accords, whose second anniversary we celebrated late last year. What we have achieved in this short period is quite remarkable. Together with our American allies, we are working relentlessly to deepen and expand Israeli-Arab normalization, which holds an important key to improving the well-being of the citizens of our troubled region and securing a better future for the next generation. My friends, Israel is an imperfect democracy, and we, like you, have our own set of internal challenges. As a young nation, only 75 years old, we are still grappling with important questions relating to our democratic system. But let me assure you, I am confident that Israel will remain a strong, vibrant democracy. As we celebrate this momentous occasion, here would be my ask of you. Whether you are Jewish or not, tell your children and grandchildren about Israel. Take them to Israel if you can. Show them that our country is so much more than our complexities and conflicts. We are a beautiful, modern country with a rich history. We are a country of a strong, proud, and diverse people. My friends, more and more young Americans and Israelis are growing up without an understanding of the importance of the alliance between Israel and the United States, or the values and history in which it is rooted. They do not know the incredible story of the moral courage demonstrated by President Truman in 1948. We have a duty to educate the next generation and pass this down. And I want to commend the Truman Library for carrying this mantle. I want to conclude by reflecting on the following quote from President Truman, and I quote, "I had faith in Israel before it was established. I knew it was based on the love of freedom, which has been the guiding star of the Jewish people since the days of Moses. I believe it has a glorious future before it, not just as a sovereign nation, but as an embodiment of the great ideals of our civilization," end of quote. I would like to believe that 75 years after President Truman took the valiant step to recognize the State of Israel, he would also agree that what our country has accomplished is nothing short of a miracle. Thank you all for your friendship. May we all continue to go from strength to strength. May God bless the United States of America, and may God bless the State of Israel. Thank you. Toda Rabba.